I'm gonna buy it as well. You don't have to.
All right. Welcome back to our class. I think it's time, even according to this clock. So let's start our class today. So we will finish what we are left with from yesterday. So yesterday we introduced the concept of heuristics and biases. And so we introduced this some additional characteristic of system one. We talked about framing effect, associate memory and priming effect, and also cognitive V's and its implication. And related to common cognitive biases, we have introduced 2 out of 4. If you remember, we mentioned confirmation bias. Overconfident. And today we will finish with the other 2, which is as you will see, this anchoring effect is a very important phenomena that we need to understand in order to be a successful negotiator, because in negotiation, anchoring is a very powerful effect. And then the last one that we'll discuss is the so-called decoy effect. And this decoy effect would actually help Shelton to get out of his indecision, and also help people in front of over-choice how they can be pushed to choose one out of different alternatives. So before we continue with these 2 biases or 2 effects, I want to listen to your experience, what you have written in your reflection, anything that you want to share with us, or if you have any question towards what we have covered so far, you want my comments or you want the insight from your classmate, that's the time you can share with us. Right. Anyone? So avoiding eye contact, that's a good sign. And one technique I could use is to keep silent. And then eventually some people get so uncomfortable, they will start talking. But I will not force anyone to share or to talk. It's just one opportunity for you to share, maybe to have a deepened understanding of what we have learned. Right? So because I really did not have time to go through all the reflections. If you want my comments on your reflection, or want to make sure that your observation or the application or your understanding of the concept and principles is correct, I mean, it's a good opportunity to share now. I mean, it's learning process. You don't have to have excellent insight before it's worth sharing with us. Right? So I'm bad at names, even though I know you're introduced. Can you remind me your name? Anastasia. Yeah. And Anastasia first, and then Ben will follow.
in my reflection, I wrote about overconfidence and how it affects students when they, for exams or maybe like deadlines and stuff like that, how they sometimes students are overconfident and just they don't put any time and effort into their assignments because they think, oh, okay, I'm very good at this, I'm gonna have it done and it's gonna be perfect. And most of the time, this thing fails in the end. And I thought it was a good example of overconfidence, as when we saw in startups, that people just think these statistics don't apply to them, and they will do something different than every other person, and they're gonna succeed. So yeah, that's about it.
Okay, yeah, this is a very good observation. So here, overconfidence is actually related to another concept that we do not have time to talk about, which is procrastination. Right? Let me write it down. One reason that we procrastinate is because, okay, we are able to finish in a couple of days, and we are also confident that other obstacles will not preventing us from achieving our goal. Okay? So one way to fight procrastination is that you have some imposed deadline, right? So there's an experiment by Dan Ariely, the author who wrote Predictable Irrationality. So predictable irrational. So he had a course, and the course you need to submit a semester report, a semester paper, and he actually asked a student to specify whether they do not have any deadline until the very end to submit the final report, or they allow the student to have this self-determined deadline, whether they have one deadline in the middle of the semester. And also he has the option to give the student this externally enforced deadline. So in comparison to the deadline, the group of students without any deadline, that they only need to submit the final report towards the end, the students who are assigned some deadline, either self-imposed or imposed by the teacher, the quality of their assignment are significantly higher. Right? So this is just a demonstration of overconfidence and procrastination and how to fight procrastination. So it's a very good observation. So in this course, when we talk about decision, we actually only focus mainly on the judgment process. So choice is something that we do not have too much time to discuss. So if you are interested in the choice part of decision making, you can read Daniel Kahneman's book, one of the recommended readings. Read this section, the part on choice. There you will have some understanding of risky decision making and also this so-called intertemporal decision making, decision for the future, right? But they are, of course, quite related. The reason we focus on judgment is because it's more related to persuasion and negotiation. So at SDU, I'm actually teaching another course, behavioral economics. We actually elaborate and expand on the choice part of this decision making. I know there are a couple of SDU students. If you are interested in the choice part, you are welcome to enroll in this behavioral economics. Thanks for sharing. And Ben?
Yeah, sure. I've written my reflection on the framing effects. I don't necessarily know whether it's one of the biases. It was a couple of years ago that I was at the shampoo aisle in the supermarket, and I wanted my bottle of shampoo is like the one that says sensitive. That was the reason I got it, by the way. But it did say 98% biodegradable ingredients. And the first things that came up in my mind were, so what about that 2% that's not biodegradable? Is it harmful? Isn't 98%, isn't the main substance that's in there just water? Doesn't that mean it's just natural?
Yeah.
Although perhaps not biodegradable, I think. And what about the other fossils? Would they be 97 now, 99? So I would say it didn't frame it in the way that I might expect them to expect it.
Okay, yeah.
But at the same time, because you explained all of that, I had to think back of that again. And I thought, now what if it said 2% non-biodegradable? I'm quite sure I probably would have chosen another bottle
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it sounds like a warning instead of something to be proud of.
Yeah. So framing would definitely not convince anyone to switch their choices. Like you are rational enough to think deeply, but definitely that would change the focus of the consumers, of other people, so that at least some a proportion of the consumer would switch their behavior because of the framing. Yeah, great observation. It does not work all the time. So the phenomena that or principles that we covered in this class, I mean, it's a general observation, right? It applies in a lot of situations, but it does not claim that it can apply to everyone, right? So statistically, these are the phenomena you would observe among a large number of people, but you cannot be sure that it works. It will change the behavior of everyone. So that's one of the caveats that I want to talk to you. So towards the end of last lecture, one student, I don't remember talking about, if I may share, I don't remember, it's just about the boyfriend and cheating thing, lying thing. Yeah, so you want to, that's a good example. If you want to share, you don't have to. So
Yeah, it was not my experience.
yeah.
I have heard one case when I can't remember when we were talking that there was a boy and there was a girl, and then they have some kind of difficult situation, something, and well, it was I don't know if it was about cheating, but like some kind of difficult situation, and then the boy was suspecting that the girl is not telling the truth, and at the first. Before the girl hasn't even said anything, the boy was like, okay, your hands are starting to sweating and you're lying because your hands are sweating. And then the situation was like, the girl was like afraid to say anything because he knew that the boy was already thinking that whatever he's going to say, the boy is going to think that he's lying.
Yeah, that's a good example. Can I ask your name again? Mito. Yeah, Mito. So Mito just asked this question whether the sweating hands are indicators of lying. I mean, she was actually asking whether there are affirmative signs of lying. We would not be able to have enough time to elaborate on lie detection. But I can share the slides from previous years if you are interested. But the general conclusions from previous research is that there's no easy way of detecting lies, right? If you watch the movie, especially the movie that's showing the situation in the United States, you'll probably see this that they call the polygraph lie detection machine, right? Basically, you connect the suspect into the machine and ask some baseline question, and then ask a question related to the suspected situation, crime-related situation, to see whether there's some physiological response to that. And research has completely refuted that, right? So I don't know, I really don't understand why the United States, the police are still using that. There's no evidence at all. And because there are all kinds of factors that would influence people's physiological response, right? So some people are just nervous, and some people, when they are being suspected, I mean, they start to get nervous even though they are telling the truth, right? And in the case of Vito's friends, this boy, he probably fall into trap of confirmation bias, because when you have the firm belief, firm confirmation that the other person is lying, all the signs are demonstrated as evidence of the other person is lying. Right? So I used to play the game called Who's the Killer. You have a script. I mean, one of the groups of friends, they sit together, they play this game. But you read this script, they're describing a situation. One of this group of friends will be the killer, right? And a great lesson I learned from that game is that confirmation bias is very prevalent because even though I study decision making, I know that I would fall into confirmation bias. But in that game, when I have this belief that one person is the real killer, everything he or she says would become some evidence. I just use or interpret the evidence, the information as the confirmation of my belief, right? So it's very difficult to avoid the trap of confirmation bias, but being aware of it is a good start, is a first step. All right, thank you for everyone's sharing. Hopefully this sharing would make you understand better these corresponding concepts. Right? So now let's finish the two rest biases. One, anchoring. Anchoring refers to people's over-reliance on the first piece of information offered when making judgment, right? So why this first piece of information is actually important and serve as so-called anchor? Well, because it serves as reference point, even if this initial information is just from random event, it's not related to the decision or the judgment you are making in any sense. So this initial information may be from just past event or random assignment. The reason that it serves as anchor because you consider as a reference point, and then you have insufficient adjustment from the anchor, right? So here is an example. So in an experiment with a group of undergraduate students, the researchers first asked the student to write down the last two digits of your ID number. In the United States, that's SSN. In Denmark, it's CPR, that's your ID number, or the last two digits of your phone number. And you would imagine that these two numbers are purely random, right? So it's not related to anything in a causal way. And then after the first question, the student were asked, are you willing to pay this amount in dollar value to get one corresponding product? The product could be a chocolate bar, a bottle, or a mug, or anything, right? So it turns out that this question, right? So first ask the two digits and then ask, are you willing to pay this amount? After these two questions, the student were asked to indicate their willingness to pay, the maximum they are willing to pay for that specific product. And here's the table demonstrating the results of this indicated willingness to pay by the students. And the products are all kinds of things. You have this trackball or keyboard, basically these electronic devices, and you can have the design book and also this chocolate bar and also wines. And so here on the horizontal, the column actually represents the corresponding reported value based on the different last two digits of the ID number. Right? So as you can see here, for almost all products, as we move from zero for low last two digits ID number to high last two digit number, there's a significant increase in the willingness to pay. Right? This is for trackball, and there's for keyboard. If you know some statistics, there are significantly statistically significant correlation between the last two digits of the ID number, similarly a random number, to the willingness to pay by the participant. Right? So this demonstrates this important anchoring effect, even though they are supposed to be unrelated to the judgment and decisions you are making. They can have a gradient effect. So here is another example. So researchers asked high school students to estimate one of the following, right? So it's just the products of the 8 numbers 1 through 8. And depending on the way the corresponding numbers are presented to the students, the estimated results are dramatically different. So the actual answer is actually a very high number. So it's like 40,000 something. But if the student were presenting the first way, this median response, median estimate is 512. And if you are putting the larger number in the front of the sequence, the median guess would be 2,250. I mean, they are far from this actual answer, but you see the difference between the way of presenting the sequence would actually lead to a very dramatic difference, right? It's 40 times difference between the actual estimate. So that's another example of the anchoring effect. So when you go to the supermarket, not only the supermarket, if you go online shopping, you'll see that a lot of the products, they are priced as 99 towards the end. That's demonstrating the effectiveness of this 99 pricing, right? So here on the left, it shows most, I mean, this is a meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is just you collect a bunch of previous study and summarize the result. And it turns out that this shows the demonstration of this 99 pricing. So you see that for all the products investigated by the marketing researcher, 60% of the price ends with 9, while there are close to 30% ends with 5, and only 7.5% ends with 0. So if you believe that the companies are rational in their pricing strategy, you would believe this 99 pricing would be effective, right? So another piece of evidence to demonstrating this psychological pricing is considering the value of the car, right? So if the cars have 9,999 miles versus 10,000 miles, I mean, it's just 1 mile different. There should be no significant difference for the value of the car. But if you look at the used car market and try to summarize the value or the selling price of the used car, you will see there would be a significant drop of the price when the first digit of the mileage increased, right? It's different, right? So that's why 999 actually is quite different from 10,000 psychologically because of the anchoring effect. You see the one in the front, then subconsciously you see some one would think that is a large number. Well, if you look at this 9, even though is no just one is just differ from the 10,000 by 1, but it actually has a less digit, and it gives you a feeling that is a lower number. Right? Okay, so many of the products when you purchase, they have this so-called MSRP, this manufacturer suggested retail price. This serves as an anchor for determining a good deal, right? So that's why people respond to the sales or discount. If you look at the price and if you check the original price, and then now the price is half. For example, it used to be $50, now it's only $24.99. I mean, you would consider it as a great deal because this old price serves as an anchor to help you to determine whether it's a good deal or not. And also here, if it has a suggested retail price $14.99, now only $9.99, then you think it's a great deal. So if you go to Amazon or other online merchandise, you will also see these things, right? So if you purchase a book, I mean, I like to purchase book on Amazon, you see there's a list price, and then it shows the actual price. you see this actual price is much lower than the list price, that would give you some motivation to think it's a good deal because of the anchoring effect of the old number shown there. And suggested quantity is also used as anchor to increase sales. So in the supermarket, sometimes you see there's a sign saying that limit 6 per person. You could only purchase 6 per person. And for most of the situation I've encountered, you do not need to purchase 6. But by saying that there's a limit of 6, it's actually served as anchor. And later we'll see here, this limit also gives people a sense of scarcity, right? So that's one principle of the influence. That's another reason, another motivation for people to purchase. And buy 10, get 2 free. This buy 10 also serves that. So you would think that 10 is the normal number you should purchase, and then you adjust to this anchor to determine the quantity that you want to purchase. So that is the anchoring effect, not choice overload. So we mentioned that rational people, I mean, they will be able to maximize their net benefit. So for rational people, having many choices would be a good thing because that means they have more opportunity, more choices to choose from. That would not hurt their well-being, hurt their level of happiness. But it's actually demonstrated that it's just the opposite. When people are fronted with too many alternatives, it's actually give them a sense of huge dissatisfaction. So that phenomena is called choice overload. Facing too many choices would lead to choice deferral, unsatisfaction, and regret. So again, we could go back and think about the case of Sheldon, right? So for Sheldon, it has 2 alternatives, but they are equally good. I mean, both of these 2 alternatives have good properties and bad properties. And it's not that easy to compare these 2 products along different dimensions, right? So how can we push Sheldon to help him to make a decision? Well, contract principle may help here. So things are just in relation to others. That's our psychology, right? So we are not good at evaluating the absolute value of all kinds of measures, but we are good at evaluating the comparison, evaluating the change. So here, looking at the black circle, I mean, these are the same black circles with the same size. But the one on the left seems much larger compared to the one on the right. Why is this the case? Well, it's just the working of our perception. So by comparison, the black circle is much larger than the gray circle surrounding it. And we judge it to be larger. Well, when it's surrounded by large circles, other circles, it seems to be smaller, right? So based on this contract principle, we are able to use the so-called decoy effect to push people towards a certain decision. So the decoy effect is describing the phenomena that adding a third alternative to the 2 alternatives that you already be faced and this third alternative is dominated by one alternative, and that would increase the attractiveness of the dominating alternative. And this third alternative is called the decoy, and so-called the decoy effect. So here is one example, right? So suppose you want to purchase a car A and car B. Well, they have pros and cons. A has a higher safety level and lower fuel efficiency, while B is just the opposite. I mean, it's hard to judge, right? Safety is important. Fuel efficiency is also important. Safety would protect your life. Fuel efficiency would save you money, right? It's hard to choose between these 2 cars, A and B. How can we use the decoy effect to make one of these 2 alternatives more attractive? I mean, what we could do is to add a decoy, right? Now, suppose you want to make the car B more attractive. You are the car salesman, you want to sell car B because you have a larger commission from it. Then what you could do is to present another car to the customer, to the potential customers, the car C. And car C has the property that it has worse safety, definitely, compared to car B, but the fuel efficiency is also worse than B. Right? Now, having this decoy, the option B, this car B, suddenly seems more attractive to you, right? So in order for the decoy to work, this C must have significantly better fuel efficiency than A, so that A is not attractive compared to C. And also at least one dimension of C, either safety or fuel efficiency, and it's also best to have both efficiency, both dimensions to be worse than B, right? So that means the properties of C has to fall into this region, right? So once you have a car C with properties in this region, then the car B would appear to be much more attractive. And also because C dominate A in fuel efficiency, so then A becomes less attractive. That's how you make car B more attractive or make the consumers to purchase, more likely to purchase car B. And this is another example that we have introduced. Here, this print subscription is actually working as a decoy that significantly increase the choice of the potential readers to this print and web subscription. Right? And that's actually where the economist Maxine will be able to earn a large amount of money. And here is one interesting so-called wingman effect. So suppose you have two potential dates, and you want to make one of them more attractive. What can you do? You can actually add a decoy. So here, if you add a distorted version of B, right, and B immediately feels much attractive, right? Because I mean, B and B prime has similar property and characteristics, but B is definitely seems more handsome. So that would make people more likely to choose B. And similarly, if you want A to appear more attractive, just have a distorted version of A prime, right? So that's the so-called wingman effect. I mean, there's a joke by Dan Ariely. So if someone asks you to go with him as a wingman, and he might be just considering as a slightly less handsome than he is. So it actually doesn't think the handsome level of you is comparable to him. So that's interesting interpretation of the decoy effect. All right, so that is the heuristics and biases that we want to discuss. So by now, we are done in this course with the decision and the judgment part. So we are able to move to the next topic, big topic, influence and persuasion. But before we start, any questions so far? Any comments? I mean, so far, we have only considered the single decision maker, right? So we have not considered the influence by others. And starting from today, we will expand our vision, our scope, to think about how other people's actions and also some of the situational factors would influence people's decision. And that is the room for influence and persuasion. Okay. So now let's move to the next set of slides, the R's of influence. So let's first, so here is the outline for today's lecture. We will talk about some important characteristics of social influence and why it is important for us as human beings to understand social influence. And then we talk about and introduce one model of influence for you to understand different elements of influence, which I call it the R's model. And that's why you see here the R's of influence, that's not grammatically correct because R usually does not have a plural form. Here is actually an acronym. R represents the four important elements of influence. A represents agent, meaning the one who is trying to influencing others. And R, we call it recipient. And sometimes you can call it a target of the influence. The reason we use recipient because we want to make this R's sounds easier to remember. And T represents tactics. And S represents situation. So that is the model of influence we will introduce. After this, we will try to introduce this so-called fixed action patterns and the principles of influence. So this is just an introduction of this fixed action patterns and how this the understanding of fixed action patterns will help us to formulate some important principles of influence. But the discussion of the principles of influence will be left for tomorrow. Right? So now, the main goal for today is to introduce this R's model of influence, four elements of influence. But before doing that, let us try to understand the importance of social influence. A question for you: why human beings succeed in dominating the world? I mean, there are, of course, many factors, many reasons that leads to our success. We are definitely more smarter. We have a larger brain. And we mentioned that we have a larger neocortex, especially the prefrontal cortex, that give us the ability of long-term planning. And that's very different from other mammals, even for the other primates. But one contributing factor of our success is actually the large-scale cooperation with strangers. Well, I would not say with strangers, with non-relatives, right? So if you look at primates, they are not able to dominate the world because they only cooperate with their kin, with their relatives. In order for them to form a cooperation, they have to be related in some way. But for human beings, we are actually cooperating with each other in this room to achieve the same goal. It's not that common for other primates, right? So this social factor of our human beings is one important contributing factor for our success. So you might think intelligence is important. Of course, intelligence is quite important. But if you look at some aspect of intelligence, we are not that superior to other primates. So here is actually an experiment conducted among chimps, right? So you see this is chimps are conducting memory tasks. So let's just watch this. It's quite fun to watch. And I can tell you that here, this chimp actually outperformed my memory skills.
This chimp has learned to count just like humans, but how does his memory ability evolve? In this test, the numbers 1 to 9 were quickly replaced by blank squares, and the chimp had to remember their position on the screen. 3 young chimps tested were all very good at the task.
You see this task? I mean, 9 numbers flashed in front of the screen. I mean, I could not even clearly see all of the numbers, and then they're gone. And then you have to click each square by the order. I mean, it seems impossible for me to achieve. Maybe because I'm older. You are probably fine.
Something similar to photographic memory. Young chimps outperformed both their mothers and human university students. When the numbers were flashed on the screen for shorter periods of time, humans had trouble remembering their order, whereas the chimps performed just as well. It's the first time chimps have beaten humans at a memory.
So that's one example that some of the intelligence or say the skills, I mean, we are not that superior. In some aspect, we are inferior to other primates. So here are more evidence among different kinds of tasks. So we have, here demonstrating the percentage correct on some test questions or test tasks. We have tests on space, on quantity, on causality, on social learning. As you can see here, we are not that better compared to chimps or orangutans, other primates. In some tasks, we are even slightly inferior compared to chimps. But the skills that we significantly outperform other primates is actually the social learning. So that's indicate that we are social animals. And the major difference of human beings from other primates, one major difference is probably our property of social animal. So here is a quite interesting observation also to demonstrating that social influence is actually important among human beings and even preventing us from achieving rationality. Okay, so here is a game. I know none of you have learned the game theory. So basically, the game representing a 2x2 payoff matrix, and the two players come together to play the game. So each player is able to choose left or right. So for the matter, in order to achieve a higher payoff, it has to be matched the other player's action, right? So here, there are two numbers on each payoff matrix. So if the mismatcher and the matcher choose left and left, then the mismatcher receives 0 and the matcher receives 4. If the mismatcher choose left, the matcher choose right, then the mismatcher receives 2 and the matcher receives 0. So as you can see here, the matcher and mismatcher, they have different goals. The mismatcher want to take a different action compared to the matcher, while vice versa, the matcher want to match the mismatcher's action in order to receive payoffs, right? So if you study game theory, this is a game with a mixed strategy equilibrium. It's a very technical term, but the lesson we can learn from the play of the game is that the chimps, the primates, when they play this game, their behaviors are more consistent with the prediction of rationality of the game theory, while humans are far from playing the so-called equilibrium strategy. Why is this the case? Well, it's because that humans, when they play the game, they are more likely to copy the behavior of the others. It's an instinct for us to learn from others, to copy others, right? And this deviation from rational place predicted by game theory in human was nearly 7 times greater than chimps deviation. So that's demonstrated here among human beings, social influence is much more greater compared to other primates. And that's one contributing factor that differentiate human beings from other primates. Right? So now let's introduce the definition of social influence. What does it mean when we talk about social influence? Social influence represent the phenomena that words, actions, or mere presence of other people, or the imagined presence of other people can influence our thoughts, feelings, attitudes, or behavior. So social situations have great influence on behavior. So let's get back to the illustration of framing effect, right? So in the first lecture, we know that this framing, right? By focusing people on different information, and they may construct their perception, their perspective just based on the information they have, right? So that's what we know so far. But what is interesting to observe is even though we have our own information, we probably believe our perception is correct. We have a certain understanding of the world. But if we see other people are doing certain things, we have the instinct to copy, especially if there is a large number of people doing the thing. We have the instinct to copy that behavior, even though we do not understand it. I mean, with intuitively, our system, one thing, there must be reason for that large number of people doing the thing, and it's better for me to do the same thing, right? So as Aristotle once said, man is by nature a social animal. Okay. So that's why it's quite important for us to understand social influence, because we are social animals by nature. So to continue our discussion of social influence. So here, there are three important concepts or three important phenomena related to social influence and also social attribution. So one is called fundamental attribution error, and then we have self-serving bias, and the last one, self-fulfilling prophecy. So these three phenomena would help us to have a deeper understanding of social influence. So that's why we want to introduce these three concepts. So talking about attribution error, let's introduce the concept of attribution. Attribution is the process by which individuals explain the causes of behavior and events. So if you see someone do something, what are the reasons? What are the factors causing that behavior? So that is the idea of attribution. So there are two types of attribution. One is called internal attribution or dispositional attribution. This attribution is just believing that behavior of some people is due to the person's attitude, character, or personality. It's dependent on their internal characteristics. While external attribution, we can also call it situational attribution, believes behavior is due to the situation. And most people would respond the same way in that situation. Right? So these are two different types of attribution. Well, fundamental attribution error is just referring to humans' general tendency to overestimate the dispositional factors relative to situational factors when explaining other people's behavior. What does this mean? It just means that we, as human beings, have the natural tendency to underestimate the power of roles in explaining behavior, underestimate the situational factor or social factors that influence people's behavior, right? So we have this tendency to believe what people do reflect who they are. But the reality is actually quite different. As we have discussed social factors will be able to influence people's behavior regardless of their personal characteristics. Right? Give you an example. So there was an experiment conducted in social psychology. So American students, they were asked to write an article to praise communism and Castro, which was the leader of Cuba. Right? So most Americans don't like Cuba or communism, and even this, the report, the essay praising communism and Castro was assigned by the students, and then these essays were passed among another group of students, and the student know that this was just an assignment. The student were forced to write this essay, but even knowing this, the evaluator of this report of the essay have the firm belief that the writers of the essay actually are proponent of communism and Castro. Right? So that is this attribution error, even though you know the fact that people are influenced by external forces, but what came out of their mouth, came out of their hands, or what came out as their behavior, you believe that due to their internal belief, internal factors, internal dispositions. So that's the fundamental, one example of fundamental attribution error. And then self-serving bias and also self-serving attribution are also quite important phenomena in social psychology. Self-serving bias is that all human beings have the tendency to perceive oneself in a favorable manner, right? And self-serving attribution is just this application of self-serving bias in the attribution of people's behavior. So self-serving attribution refers to the tendency to attribute one's success to dispositional factors and other success to situational factors. What does this mean? If I'm successful, well, that's because I'm hardworking, I'm smart, I'm handsome, I'm beautiful. I have good relationship with others. I know how to have connections with others, right? Well, when you had a failure, you become less successful. You say that, oh, I was born in a poor family. No one helped me. I'm born in the country where the government is just dictating all the resources from the poor. So I do not have any opportunity. And on the other hand, if you look at other people's success, right, if they are successful, oh, they're just lucky because they're born in a rich family. I mean, they just run into the industry that is booming. When you see the failure of others, you say, oh, he's just a person with poor skills, right? So he would not be able to achieve anything because that's just who he is. So that is the self-serving attribution, right? We believe our success is due to our personal factor, our failure due to external factor, while we attribute other people's success to external factor and their failure to their dispositional factor. Right? So this self-serving attribution makes it hard for people to learn from their own mistakes, because when we make some mistake which leads to our failure, we will think, oh, we attribute that to external factors. It's not me. It's just I'm unlucky. Right? And also we are it's difficult for us to remain humble because when we become successful, we don't realize. And the actuality is that most of the success also is dependent on some external factors. So the successful business, even if you are a successful entrepreneur, it's difficult for you to build Amazon. There are a lot of lucky factors. I would believe that Jeff Bezos would be able to become a successful entrepreneur. But if you force him to start from scratch again, it's not that easy. I mean, chances are slim that he will be able to build another Amazon, because being a successful entrepreneur and having a successful business maybe depend on your skills a lot, but building the largest business that depends on a lot of the luck and some other factors, external factors that out of your control. And also this self-serving attribution would give us this bias blind spot. We have this self-serving bias, but at the same time, we think that we are objective, we are unbiased, and compared to others. So we believe that we are more objective and less biased than others. But I mean, statistics has shown that our biases are similar to each other. We are no more or less objective than a general other person. So here is a quite interesting illustration of self-serving bias, right? So in motor vehicle accidents, according to statistics, 91% of drivers blame someone else. Okay, so if you think that the accident involved two persons, the objective matter would be, half of the time you should blame yourself. But you see 91% of drivers blame someone else. And even no other cars involved, 37% of drivers find fault with others. So here are some states that's quite fun to read. In this car accident report that does not involve another car, right? So just read a couple of them. You can read the rest for fun. Coming home, I drove into the wrong house and collided with a tree I don't have. Right? So because there's another house, it has a tree, but my house does not tree. That's the tree to be blamed. I collided with a stationary truck coming the other way. And a pedestrian hit me and went under my car. Right? So you just always have some other people, other factors to blame. That's our self-serving bias. And self-serving bias has great implications for negotiation also. Right? So we will have negotiation exercise. Those are low stake, but if you look at a lot of the high stake negotiation, self-serving bias usually leads to this failure to get any agreement. And the negotiation between nations would also be influenced by self-serving bias. Negotiation between individuals, groups, or nations can be difficult. Each side think that it sees the issues clearly, but the other side is biased. Right? So trade war between China and the United States, I mean, if you read the media of the two countries, I mean, I happen to be Chinese, I know the media coverage in China, you see that both parties blaming the other. Right? If you look at the Ukraine war, I mean, here it's politically correct to blame Russia, right? But if you really want to understand this war, you have to understand the view standpoint of Russia. They have their own reasons, but we don't listen, and that's why it's difficult to solve this issue. Right? Also, this the war in Gaza area, both parties have their justified reason to take revenge, to achieve their goal, but because of this self-serving bias, wars happen. I mean, negotiation is always better than having a war because the result of war is just one party defeating the other, but even the winners would actually not winning the war. They would incur a huge loss. Now that's self-serving bias. The last one, self-fulfilling prophecy. This is a quite interesting phenomenon, and it has a great application to our own life. So in order to introduce self-fulfilling prophecy, it's better for us to introduce this explanatory style and mindset. So this mindset was introduced by Dweck. So this social psychologist Dweck introduced or identified two different types of mindset. One is the so-called fixed mindset. It's a little bit pessimistic, meaning that there has this belief that causes of trouble can't be changed. While this growth mindset is more optimistic. They believe the causes of trouble are just situation. Okay. So these two different mindsets would create narratives that influence future success or failure. So it's actually quite important to have a growth mindset, because when you have a growth mindset, when you encounter some difficulties, you have this belief that you are able to overcome this obstacle. Right? So that makes you more optimistic. And also applying this mindset to child rearing. If you praise a child, and not only a child, when I praise a students also, try to comment on something that they can change. Right? Do not say that you are so smart, you are so beautiful. So these are characteristics that they cannot change. Instead, you comment on the hardworking, because if you comment on their smartness, their intelligence, then that is easy to lead them to a fixed mindset. Because if they have the belief that you give them the belief that they're smart, but when they encounter something difficult, contradicting with their belief that they are smart, well, they just give up. They will not try anything difficult to show that they are actually not that smart. If you comment on their hardworking, I mean, that actually motivates them to have this growth mindset and have this belief that when they are able to try, they are able to achieve their goal. And now, after introducing the idea of mindset, then we can introduce this so-called self-fulfilling prophecy. Acting on initial beliefs and behave in a way to confirm them, causing the beliefs to be realized, right? So if you have a firm belief, then you will act according to your belief, right? And your action, your behavior, because they are consistent with your belief, that actually reinforce your belief. And then that makes your belief become reality. That's the so-called self-fulfilling prophecy. Do you believe in astrology? So we know that this is a confirmation bias. So later we'll show some experimental results that you have completed on Monday and to demonstrating some of the biases, right? So do you believe in astrology? Well, I can tell you that there's no evidence demonstrating astrology can predict anything, right? But when you read some of the articles related to astrology, if you believe it, I will see that that actually makes sense. What is going on? It's probably confirmation bias. And it's actually true that if you believe in astrology, I mean, what is written in astrology would actually have a great influence on your behavior because you believe that it's consistent with my personality, and then I act in a way according to what is written for my it's called zodiac, right? And then you have this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Even nonsense is written in this prediction, but because you have firm belief in it, to act according to the prediction, and that caused this description to become reality. Placebo and nocebo effect is also this so-called self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So, placebo effect, when you have clinical trials, you have different medicine, different pills, and usually one is the actual pill, the other would be just placebo, with just a sugar pill, right? It has no actual effect. But the reason we have this placebo is because the placebo effect. If you have firm belief that the medicine would work to cure your disease, your belief alone can actually have some influence on your body. And sometimes, you think you take the painkiller, your migraine, your pain, your headache will just be gone because of your belief, because this miraculous functioning of our body. That's placebo effect. What is nocebo effect? Anyone knows? I thought someone raised their hand. Yes.
I don't know, I could make a guess if no one does. I would assume that there's a medicine that, for example, does work, but because you don't believe in it, that it doesn't show.
Yeah. It's just exactly what Ben was mentioning. Nocebo effect is just if you have a firm belief that something does not work, it will not work on you, even though it could work on other people because of this opposite belief. And it's not just that sometimes it doesn't work on you, it also could do harm. Nocebo is actually Latin meaning to harm. Placebo in Latin means to please, right? So nocebo effect will cause something might be effective to have no effect on you, or sometimes to even have harm on you. So that also self-fulfilling prophecy. And here is an interesting study among people with the Chinese background. In traditional Chinese medicine and astrology, fate is linked to the year of birth, is associated with one of the 5 phases: fire, earth, metal, water, wood. I think I was born in a metal year, right? So when you're born in a certain year, then you are more susceptible to certain kinds of disease. So each phase, I think 2 year is a phase, and then it's just goes in a cycle. In a cycle, each phase is associated with a particular organ or symptom. For example, a person born in the earth year is more susceptible to tumor because this idea is that tumor would be grown in more likely in Earth. So Earth would make it grow larger, right? So that is the idea, that is the belief. And here is a study conducted among these Chinese Americans in the United States. So here on the y-axis is represent the months of life lost due to beliefs. Meaning that if you're born in an Earth year, then you always suspect that you would have tumor someday in your life. And this concern, even it would not lead to tumor. Indeed, it might cause harm to your body, right? So, especially when you get tumor, then you have the firm belief that you will not survive the tumor. So here, it shows that among European Americans, the so-called prediction by Chinese medicine and astrology does not have any effect, right? So if you're born a certain year, you are not more likely to get the certain disease or die from it, right? So here, this month lost due to belief, I mean, is close to zero. It's not significant at all. If you look at all the Chinese Americans, they have this belief, and because of the belief, it caused them to lose 5 years of life. Right? And this is among all the Chinese Americans, including the second generation immigrant. But if you only focus on the first generation immigrant who were born in China, then relocates to the United States, this harmful effect is more stronger because they are likely to have a firm belief. Right? And again, here is another interesting effect. If you are Chinese American and live in San Francisco or Los Angeles community, they have a meaning there's a Chinatown community. You are surrounded by all the other Chinese people with this firm belief on the Chinese cultures. The harmful effect is more, even more significant, even more dramatic. Right? So that's how self-fulfilling beliefs sometimes can really have harmful effect on your health. And another example is this general stereotype that girls are bad at mathematics. I mean, in a lot of countries, it's true. I mean, based on the grades, but it can be shown that much of those differences are actually caused the beliefs by the girls, by the females, that they are not good at mathematics, right? Because there's an experiment conducted among this Asian American, right? Asian are believed to be good at mathematics, but girls, females are believed to be bad at mathematics. So the Asian female students, they have this two identity. And when they conduct this mathematics test, when they are primed to think about their Asian identity, their performance are significantly higher compared to the case when they are primed to think about their gender identity. Right? So for example, on the front of the page, you are primed to write down your ethnicity, right? So see whether you're Chinese, Korean, or to indicate you are Asian, or sometimes you just indicate your gender. I mean, this priming can actually have a great difference. So beliefs can have a great influence on your actual performance. And there's another piece of evidence, based on the gender equality of the country, this performance difference in mathematics would vary a lot. For gender equal countries, like in Denmark and in Sweden, the difference on the performance in mathematics are very minimal. And in Iceland, the girls are actually perform better compared to guys in mathematics. So a lot of those idea that girls are worse at mathematics compared to guys, I mean, they are just stereotypes. But the stereotype can really have a lasting harmful effect on people's achievement. So that's self-fulfilling beliefs. And Pygmalion effect So that's related to self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, here, this self-fulfilling prophecy is not your own belief, but other people's expectation. So high expectation would lead to improved performance. In Greek mythology, sculptor Pygmalion fell in love with his sculpture, which then came into life. I mean, this Pygmalion effect then would be used by psychologists to refer to the fact that if you have high expectation towards some other things, usually refer to other people, then that may make your expectation come true. So another example of self-fulfilling prophecy, but here you are referring to other people's expectation, not your own belief. So here is a movie. I don't know how it's a really old movie. I remember when I was in high school, I watched this movie. So that in our English class, this movie was shown to us to help us learn English because it has a good illustration of good pronunciation because this lady was played by Audrey Hepburn, was actually a girl selling flowers, and linguistics just wants to think that by changing people's language, the way they speak, you can actually cause other people to believe they have a high social status. And eventually, the linguistic train this the flower girl eventually speak really decent English, decent language, and convinced other people that he was a princess in one of those European countries. Right? So this play was originally written by George Bernard Shaw as just called Pygmalion, and later it was adapted by the film My Fair Lady. And here it is so that this linguist has a high expectation towards this lady, and eventually it actually caused other people to have high expectation of her and believe that she has high social status. So now here is a very famous study on Pygmalion effect. So in the primary school, the teachers were told that 20% of the children were bloomers and would make significant intellectual. I mean, basically, this 20% of students were, I mean, the teacher was told that the 20% of students were smart. I mean, they will achieve great things. But in actuality, these 20% of students are just randomly picked by the researcher. Well, what happened later? So here we have the percentage of children for the corresponding gains, IQ gains after the school, right? So the red one representing these randomly picked bloomers, the high achievers or smart children, and compared to the orange bar representing the other students. And we see that 80% of the believed expected bloomers, they have 80%, 80% of them have 10 points gained in IQ test, right? And compared to only less than 50%, 50 points gained compared to the other students, even though they are actually randomly picked. And if you look at the percentage having 30 points in IQ gains, the bloomers have more than 20% of students having that, while only 5% of the other students were able to have this 30 points gain. Well, even though they are supposedly not different from each other at all because they are just randomly picked. Why is this the case? It's because the high expectations of a teacher. When the teachers expect higher performance from you, I mean, they might just give you a more focus on you and give you more encouragement. When you make some mistake, they think that, oh, you're just mistakes. So you are still able to learn from the mistake. Well, compared to the other student, when they see the mistake, they think that you're probably just not smart. You're not this type of student to have a high achievement. So these expectations would have a great influence on the performance of the students. So that's why, I mean, the application to us is that when you have any relationship with others, your kids, your partners, I mean, have high expectation. I mean, it would actually pay in the long run, right? Okay, now that's the three important concepts in related to social influence. Let's just recall, we mentioned the idea of attribution, and we tend to have this fundamental attribution error. We do not consider social influence enough. Right? So we underestimate the effect of social influence. And also we have this self-serving bias, especially self-serving attribution. We think other people's success is more likely due to external factors, their failure due to their dispositional factors. But for us, we will attribute the success to our personal factors and our failure to external factors. And then we have introduced the self-fulfilling prophecy, how beliefs and expectations, both beliefs about yourself and the expectations towards others, would have a great influence on the eventual outcome. Right? So that's the three important concepts. Now we are able to finally introduce this ARS model of influence. The four elements: agents, recipient, tactics, and situation. Okay. Before introducing these four elements, let's have some group discussion. So form a group of 4 or 5 and discuss based on your knowledge or experience or the books that you have read, the movies, the videos that you have watched, what are the key factors that could increase the likelihood of effective influence and persuasion. So if you read through the notes, you will notice that all of you have some intuitive understanding and also very correct, accurate understanding of how to make influence and persuasion more effective. So the goal of our lecture is try to have a systematic view, a structured view of effective influence and communication, and also persuasion. So here, let's see, we mentioned about the culture, about storytelling, about social pressure, charisma of the agents, confident appearance, facial expression, body language. I mean, all these things are something that we'll talk about. Right? So keep this in mind. I mean, it may be helpful to get back to what you have written after this course, after our discussion of influence and persuasion, to see whether you are able to summarize this or structure all these factors in a more scientific and systematic way. So now, let's just introduce these 4 different elements of influence. So the ARS model. So the 4 elements: agent represent the person attempting to exert influence. Recipient refers to the person or group the influence targets at. And tactics represents what an agent say or does to accomplish their aims. While situation represents the context or environment where influence takes place. Okay? To give you a concrete example, in the political speech, I mean, the speech is trying to influence the potential voters. This ARS model breaks down as follows. The politician is the agent, the crowd of listeners are the recipients, the contents and the delivery of the speech relate to the tactics, and the context where the speech was taking place, and also this corresponding media coverage and other external events going on while this speech was taking. These are all situational factors. And you probably notice that the notes that you have, the lecture notes you have, are not complete. I will post the complete version afterwards because this will just motivate your group discussion. Now, let's just talk about the outcomes of influence. So the outcomes and influence can be summarized as three C's. Conflict is the worst outcome you don't want to achieve. It's the recipients resisting or fighting against your idea. That represents the influence failure. While you could also achieve compliance. Compliance is definitely better than conflict. This represents the fact that recipients agree to follow or obey. But the recipient might not have this internal change of their attitude. I mean, they might just try to comply your request without agreeing with you. That's compliance. Commitment is the strongest or the best outcome of influence. It refers to the recipients convinced and internalize the corresponding idea or the message that you are trying to convey. We often work towards commitment because that's the better outcome, right? But sometimes we have to settle for compliance. In some situations, it's not possible to have the commitment from the recipients, then we just aim at the compliance from the recipient. Now, let's talk about the first element of influence, the agents. What are the characteristics would make agents more influential? I mean, these are the characteristics that most of you have mentioned in your discussion. Physical attractiveness. I mean, if you look attractive, I mean, that's actually one booster. Right? We will talk more about this tomorrow. And again, three C's are great characteristics of influential agents. If you show that you are competent, if you show that you are caring, and if you show that you are consistent towards the recipient, then you are more likely to influence the recipient. And also, group identification is a quite important factor. If the audience, the recipient, think that you are the same group, I mean, the group can be categorized by so many factors, right? Females is one identity. All identities can be considered as a group. Female can be considered as a group. Engineers can be considered as a group. Students can be considered as a group. Danish can be considered as a group. If you find some connection, some commonality between the recipient and yourself, then you are more likely to be influential because the target, the recipient, would think that you are of the same group. This commonality would actually increase the chance of successful persuasion. Charisma. I mean, this is a vague term, but it seems that it's related to competence, caring, consistency, related to physical attractiveness, and also related to the way you speak, your body language, your facial expression. But all these things will be able to summarize as charisma. And you might think that charisma is some born or innate skills or characteristics, but it has been shown that charisma can actually be trained. A study demonstrating that after a month of training, I mean, just several lectures, the trainees can be considered as more charismatic, right? We will not be able to spend time on how to make you more charismatic, but charisma is actually one important factor. So talking about this group identity, I mean, there's a similarity between agents and recipients is a great factor that would influence the successfulness of influence, right? So here are some examples. Students contributed more than twice, $2 versus $1, when they share the same name as the requester. So this is the result from the an experiment. So basically, that you make requests to the potential participant of the experiment, and you know their name, right? So you just make up a name that probably have the first name with the corresponding target. And it turns out that if the student find that the requester have the same name, they contribute more than twice compared to the other case. And also 62% female undergraduate participant agreed to help a fellow student with the same birthday versus 34% with different birthdays. Again, this is actually an experiment. It's made up birthday because it's not easy to find the same birthday with a corresponding recipient. But it turns out that having the same birthday leads to the belief that you have the same identity, some kind of connection, and you are more likely to be influenced by the agents. And it's also interesting that participants were not aware at all the influence by this incidental similarity, right? If you ask them whether they think the same first name has influenced their behavior, they don't think so, but they actually have been influenced. That's also one example of this attribution error, right? So you ignore this factor, external factors. You think that is out of your generosity, but the external factors can have a great influence on your contribution. Now, talking about the characteristics of recipient, of course, the connection between the agent and recipient is an important factor, the group identity. But in general, who are the recipients that are more likely to be influenced or persuaded? And sometimes it's not a good term because receptive recipients sometimes represent easily manipulated by the agent. So here is just a summary, some facts that you need to know. People from collectivist culture are more likely to be influenced or persuaded compared to people from individualist culture. Asian cultures, like Chinese culture, Japanese, Korean culture, Malaysian culture, actually most culture other than the Western cultures are actually collectivist culture, like the culture from the Middle East are also collective culture. They are more likely to be persuaded compared to people from the Western cultures, the Americans, the Europeans, right? So that is a culture thing. Again, we will elaborate this towards the last lecture of our class. And people with high suggestibility. So this is some kinds of personality, right? So you can ask a bunch of questions to measure each person's suggestibility. So if you are interested, I can send you the link of to the questions asked to measure people's suggestibility. But it turns out that if you demonstrated a high score in this suggestibility survey, then you are more likely to be influenced by others. Preteens and teens are less resistant to peer pressure, right? So this is a particular type of influence. I mean, it's a social pressure, but it's a social pressure from your peer. The teenagers and also the preteens, they are very likely to be influenced by their peers, and they care a lot about the opinions of their peer. Right? This ability to resist influence increased gradually until age 20. So this, if you think about the brain structure, is also related to the development of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that gives you self-control. Right? So when your prefrontal cortex is maturely developed, then you do not care too much about other people's opinion. But when before it's fully developed, I mean, other people's opinion are very important to you. So there's a saying that, I mean, I also read child-rearing books because I'm a parent now. Now, my daughter is 3 years old, you have a great influence on her. But once they get into school, I mean, they will care a lot more about the opinions of their peers rather than the opinions of their parents. So it will be much easier for them to be influenced by others. So the only influence, I mean, the best influence the parents can exert on their children is to help them to choose their peers, because peer pressure would inevitably become much stronger compared to the opinions of the parents. Right? And the peer pressure gradually, it's always exists, but it gradually decreases until you reach early 20s when your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And also, a related phenomenon is that older adults are more likely to be influenced by deceptive advertising. This is also due to this functioning, executive function of the brain, because when you gradually age, your prefrontal cortex actually start to to decline. Its function also start to decline. This decline would cause decrease the cognitive function and also the ability to comprehend the information. That make the older people more likely to be influenced by deceptive in advertising. And also people distracted or not motivated are more likely to be influenced by extraneous factors or influence tactics, also susceptible to false claims. When you are tired, I mean, this is related to the tiring of system 2. When you are distracted, when you are not motivated, or when you are tired, you do not want to use your system 2. I mean, and we know that system 1 is really gullible. It's very easy to be influenced and manipulated by others. So these factors that make you less likely to use system 2 would also increase the chance for you to be manipulated or to be influenced. So that's characteristics of receptive recipients. Now, tactics, the third element. We mentioned tactics refers to what to say and how to convey your message. So let's focus first on what to say to increase your chance of persuasion and influence. We talk about framing effect. So framing is actually a quite important tactics. I already give you some example, right? Do you want 1 or 2x instead of do you want any x? Do you want to go now or 5 minutes later, or say, do you want to go? So these are all examples of framing. I mean, the framing of the message can have a great influence on the compliance of the responding recipient. So try to focus on specific information, right? And the information that increase the chance of successful influence. Also, talk to emotions. We mentioned that emotions are quite important in all kinds of decision making. So whenever possible, try to talk to emotions. We'll give more examples tomorrow. And also tell stories. We have seen some of the insights from the discussion. Storytelling is actually a very effective way of persuasion and influence. Well, one reason storytelling is so effective is actually directly talk to emotions. When you present statistics, numbers, they seem so abstract that the audience, the readers would lose their interest and they stop paying attention. So I have the experience when I teach economics, sometimes you have to present data and teach equations, mathematics, and that's when I lose a lot of the students because they don't think that's so interesting. But whenever I give examples, everyone will look at me and get very interested and excited. Storytelling is quite important to get your message conveyed and accepted by the audience. And whenever possible, make the message concrete and visual, appeals to values and beliefs, right? And also, the structure of message can have a great influence on the acceptability or receptibility of your message. So there is a proven structure for effective persuasion that is so-called ABT structure. So the ABT structure can be considered as 3 parts, which we'll elaborate on Friday when we talk about persuasion. So basically, when you present a message, try to first confirm people's prior belief to increase acceptance, right? Because of this self-serving bias and overconfidence, when you present something that's so dramatically different from people's prior belief, I mean, they will not believe it and they will stop listening because that's contradicting with their beliefs and also to an extent contradicting their identity. So if you have some message that are not exactly the same as people's prior belief, usually they will not be exactly the same. Try to present some information first that confirms people's prior belief so that they become receptive to what is followed. So this is the so-called end part, right? So you lay the foundation of the persuasion and then highlight a problem to capture attention, right? If you keep telling and, something that everyone agrees, it becomes boring, right? So there's no information. But the problem is something that would draw people's attention. So this is the bad part. Right? After you present a problem, the bad part, you will try to present a solution to enhance relevance. That is the therefore part. So these three parts has been proven to be more effectively conveying your message so that other people are more likely to accept your message. We will elaborate on this. So here is just a brief introduction because it's related to tactics, but we will give more examples on how to apply this APT structure on fighting. And now, what to focus on? So here is just one example of tactics, because tactics also refers to what kind of action you take to achieve your goal, to influence other people's behavior. So suppose you work in a company, you want to get pay raises and get promotions. Should you focusing on demonstrating your competence, or should you focus on having a good relationship with your department head, with your boss? Well, it turns out that supervisor-focused influence had a much more positive effect. Those who focused their influence on the job and had lower salary and fewer promotion than those who focus on their supervisors, right? So this is a good example to show the focus is also important. I mean, we mentioned the mere exposure effect. You have a good relationship with your boss. I mean, when he or she think about a pay raise or promotion, I mean, you are more likely to pop into their mind, right? So tactics that make your boss like you may be more important than tactics that demonstrate your competence. It's a bit cynical to know this, but that's a fact. So of course, in an ideal world, you would demonstrate your competence, but at the same time have a good relationship with your boss. But in reality, sometimes if you have to focus, the focus on the relationship is also quite important. Sometimes it's more important than demonstrating your competence. And now, talking about tactics, we can roughly divide tactics into hard and soft. So the negotiation tactics are also related to influence tactics, also having this hard or soft tactics. What tactics should you do? Well, what do we mean by hard or soft tactics? Let's first give a definition. Hard tactics threatens the autonomy of the recipient. You will try to get someone to think or act in a certain way by metaphorically pushing them. You don't motivate them, you push them to do, or say you force them to do something. I mean, the force may be your power, maybe the organizational rules. It's just you force them, you do not listen to their opinion, but forcing them to do the things, and you do not even think about whether they agree with you. That's hard tactics. Soft tactics support the autonomy of the recipient. You try to get someone to think and act in a certain way by making that alternative more appealing. Maybe you think that this alternative is better for your future, right? It is consistent with the value. It will make our world a better place. So these are actually trying to support the autonomy of the recipient and allow the recipient to make their own decision. So which tactics should we use? Well, we could use both, but you should be careful to use hard tactics. Hard tactics are often used when the agent has power over the recipient. So it's like a supervisor towards subordinates and not the other way. So it's difficult for you to use hard tactics to your peers, to your supervisor, definitely not to your wife. You will see bad outcomes because that will generate great resistance, right? I'll elaborate on why this is the case. So in a study in an organizational setting, a researcher has actually tried to test different specific tactics and to demonstrate their effectiveness, right? So there are several of them. Let me count: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 tactics altogether, and they try to investigate and measure the effectiveness of each tactic. So rational persuasion is a tactic try to convince with reason, logic, or facts. And inspirational appeal is just appeal to emotion, beliefs, and values. And then we have consultation. It's just you try to involve others in planning and decision-making to encourage change. I mean, this is usually considered as a good tactic by psychologists because by involving other people into this discussion, then once the decision is reached, these people would consider that decision of her or his own decision. So it's more likely for them to actually implement this decision. I mean, to have this internally agreement towards this agreed decision. Ingratiation, meaning just give praise and flattery. I mean, in personal relationship with others, praise is quite important. But in influence, I mean, it also have some effect. So in ingratiation, it just gives someone a good mood by being friendly or using praise or flattery. And then personal appeals refers to friendship and loyalty while making a request, right? So you are my friend. You should do me a favor. I mean, this seems like a bit hard in terms of tactics. Exchange means you try to express or imply promises for returning favor. Right? You can specifically say that you do this, then I will give you a promotion. Your boss can say this to you. That's an exchange. Coalition, you get other support to persuade someone. Right? So I want to persuade you. I said, George also agreed with me. So, right? And also Melinda also agreed with me. You should also come. So that's coalition. Pressure is just to use intimidation or threats to demand compliance. Legitimizing refers to organizational rules once power or support from superior. So you see this pressure and the legitimizing seem to be a bit hard and can be grouped into the hard tactics. So knowing all these different tactics, let's try to group them into soft and hard tactics. So roughly speaking, you can say that this rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, consultation, ingratiation, personal appeal, exchange, they can be considered as soft tactics. Of course, the softness of these tactics are also vary, but they mainly support the autonomy, meaning that they leave this decision by the corresponding target or recipient. And pressure, coalition, legitimizing, they are considered as hard tactics because they try to threaten the autonomy, try to force the other person to comply with you. Now, what is the outcome of the research conducted in several organizations? And it turns out that rational persuasion, giving the reasons, the logic, the facts, and also inspirational view, talking about the value. This is consistent with what we believe, and this is consistent with the general benefit, the general well-being of our society. So these two has been proven to be the most effective tactics. So they consistently and positively related to an outcome of commitment. I mean, the other tactics, I mean, here the measure is just the level of commitment, right? The other tactics are able to lead to compliance, right? But the soft tactics are most effective in changing people's attitude to get them to be aligned with you in terms of their internal beliefs and perception. Now let's talk about why we should be careful towards hard tactics, especially towards your peers. I mean, no one would actually try to use hard tactics with their boss, their subordinates. And with your peers, you should be very careful. With your subordinate, maybe sometimes you just want a quick compliance so that the progress will be guaranteed, then hard tactics could be used. But it should be very careful to apply hard tactics with your peers. Hard tactics such as punishment and can crowd out intrinsic motivation. Right? Why, even though they comply, right? If you force your children to do something, and because you are much stronger, you are without their kids, they cannot fight against you. But after they comply, they might have this resentment. I mean, later it may backfire. So that would crowd out their intrinsic motivation. So for example, I force my children to work on the homework. I mean, because of my power, they comply, but internally they really want to play. I mean, this may be harmful to them in the long run because that might crowd out their enjoyment in doing the homework, their intrinsic motivation to do the homework, to think that this is important, right? So I see a lot of examples when parents just push too much for their children doing certain things in the future when the children grow up, and they will be rebellious. So be careful because it could crowd out their intrinsic motivation to do a certain thing. Hard tactics almost never lead to commitment. Why is this the case? Because when you push, consider the Newton law of physics. When you push, I mean, the natural reaction of the object is getting away, right? And that is the same for human beings. And actually, our evolutionary path has wired our brain such that when there's some pressure, we'll try to either fight, right, to fight against the force, or to flee. I mean, it's a fight or flight reaction. So that's a natural pressure. I mean, it's very difficult to lead to commitment. But there are certain situations hard tactics could be used. We should say that only when the agents have the power over the recipient. And also, if sometimes under certain circumstances, commitment is not possible or feasible, and sometimes it's even not necessary because for example, you just want to finish this project and you are the boss, you just force all your subordinates to work late. I mean, they might not agree with your opinion, but you use the power so to guarantee the finishment of this project. I mean, that's when hard tactics could be important because here short time compliance is quite important for the success of the project, and you don't care too much about the whether the recipient are agreeing with you or not. Okay, so talking about these tactics, there is one management approach, or you could say tactic is called discipline without punishment, can be considered as a combination of hard and soft tactics. So it aimed at correcting employees' behavior through positive means rather than punitive action. You don't try to punish the employees, but through some other positive means. So it's a combination of hard and soft tactics that emphasize mutual respect and accountability. So you could use this with your kids in case you will have children in the future, right? So it consists of 3 steps. You first identify the problem. So together you identify the discrepancy between actual and the desired performance and its impact. And then you collaboratively figure out a solution, right? This is like a consultation. Try to involve the other in making a decision. So set a mutually agreeable plan for improvement. And also you have this positive reinforcement, recognize and reward improvement and positive change in behavior. So one important lesson you could learn from previous research is that punishment is almost never necessary in order to have effective influence. Right? If you look at some of the most famous child rearing and parenting books, the general conclusion is the same. Punishment is never necessary and could only, under circumstances, lead to adverse effect when you try to change the children's behavior. So it's very difficult to force them to behave good by making them feel bad, right? Because punishment usually makes people feel bad. Now, one important you can say is call it an active a tactic is active listening, which was mentioned by some of the groups. Agents have to listen in order to adjust their influence efforts to account for their target's thoughts and feelings. And this information is important to frame your message because we talk about the importance of framing, right? But without understanding the preferences and the beliefs and expectations of recipient, it's difficult to frame a message so that it becomes influential. Right? And listening is also important for the successful use of rational persuasion and inspirational appeal. And also previous research has demonstrated that active listening can actually increase your popularity. And the most important factor for you to become a great communicator is not to talk a lot. It's actually just this active listening. Right? You don't need to talk anything. You don't need to speak even a word. You maybe just nodding your head and show your empathy and you have a truly understand the other person's message. And the other person may just consider you as a great communicator. So great communicator, one most important characteristic is active listening. Now, the last element of influence, situation. Humans constantly observe and interpret their surroundings, often without even being aware of it. Right? And in trying to make sense of uncertain environments, we often use behavior of others as guide, which is called social proof. So this can be also illustrated by the this image here. When you are uncertain what to do and you see other people getting an umbrella, I mean, you would intuitively think that it's actually good for you to copy and to learn from others, right? So this is one example of social proof. And we already talked about priming. Some of you also mentioned priming in persuasion. We learned from the working of system one is that exposure to factors in the environment could influence behavior. US flags among the Americans, they make people more likely to vote for the Republican. Well, most people think Republicans are more patriot. The effect is not that significant, but it did have some change in the voting behavior. And here is my example we already mentioned. Support for education funding is greater when polling station is in a school. So that's the situational factor. And also if you see fluffy clouds on background in the browser when you try to shop online, these clouds would make customers pay more attention to the comfortable feature of sofa instead of the price, right? So, I mean, this is associated with the priming and also associated memory. Again, the last example is something that we have already mentioned. Playing French songs make people more likely to buy French wine in a wine shop. So to summarize, behaviors are greatly influenced by social factors. So we introduced three concepts related to social influence: fundamental attribution error, self-serving attribution or self-serving bias, I should have put there, and then self-fulfilling prophecy. And there are four elements of influence: agent, recipient, tactics, and situation. And it has been shown that rational persuasion and inspirational appeals consistently and positively relate to an outcome of commitment. Active listening is quite important. It's a key to successful influence, and it's a key for you to be a great communicator.